Welcome to the Big Ten Online as we take an in-depth look at children's rights and access and opportunity into education. And today, the session overview, I'm really excited to be a part of this, and we've got so much things to get through within this hour, but let me give you a great overview of today's event. So Big Ten will take in-depth look at children's rights and access and opportunities in education. We will examine this through three major lenses. Firstly, looking at how we ensure children's rights are respected and protected in a digital environment. Secondly, we will explore how access to education has been impacted by the pandemic. How can we ensure that millions do not find themselves on the wrong side of the digital divide and that everyone has access to higher education? And then finally, we'll take a look at how we ensure all children have the opportunities to succeed, whether through investment in edTech, apprenticeships, or technical skills education. What needs to be done in policy, practice, or law to ensure children and young people can realize all three and all have the chance to flourish? And once again, I'm really excited to be chairing this. My name is Mark Martin, aka Urban Teacher. You can find me on Twitter, but not on TikTok yet. I haven't created the Urban Teacher account for TikTok, so please watch out for that soon. I've been in education for the last 15 years, and during that time, I've been teaching around IT, which was at the time, then it changed to ICT, and now computer science. And 8 years ago, I saw there was a merging gap between what I had in my classroom as an academic, and I really wanted to merge what I was teaching in my curriculum to all of this tech innovation that was happening on my doorstep. So I was able to bring in lots of edtech companies to test their products with my young people. That built confidence in my young people and gave them the enthusiasm to think about tech as a career, as something they would like to do in further education. I also lead an organization called UK Black Tech that tries to help the representation across the tech sector. Because if we want the UK to be the most innovative, we need to make sure that it reflects us, it reflects everybody in our community, and reflects homegrown talent. So yeah, check us out, UK Black Tech. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce our speakers for today, and I'm going to give a little bit of their bios, but they're going to also lead a presentation on some of the amazing stuff that's happening in their world. And then we're going to have an open discussion where we'd love to hear from you, the audience, your questions. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Gillian Keegan MP. She's the Minister for Apprenticeship and Skills. Since her election in 2017 and re-election in 2019, Gillian has occupied several positions. She was elevated to Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the Department for Education in February 2020, where she is the Minister responsible for Apprenticeship and Skills. The second speaker we've got today is Jen Persson, the founder and director of DefendDigitalMe. Jen Persson is the director of DefendDigitalMe, a call to action to protect children's rights to privacy founded by teachers and parents who campaign for safe, fair and transparency data processing and education in England. And then the third speaker we've got Joe Hutchinson, Director for Social Mobility and Vulnerable Learners Education Policy Institute. Joe joined in the Education Policy Institute in March 2016. She graduated from London School of Economics with a master's in Public and Economic Policy with a distinction in 2005. Her second year of postgraduate study was completed at Columbia University. So Joe has a plethora or lots of experience in this field, and it's going to be great to hear from them. So let's kick the conversation off. And the first person up today to give a presentation is Jen. So over to you, Jen.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Actually, I understand that Gillian has to go to a vote shortly. So we're going to mix it up if that's all right with everyone. And Gillian's going to go first. Thanks, Gillian.
Thanks, Jen. And yes, there's, the minister's on his feet behind me. So apologies to everybody. But first of all, thank you so much to the team for inviting me. I wanted to come to the Big Tent Ideas Festival ever since it started. And I think George has invited me a few times and I've tried a few times. So I'm so delighted to join you now, and thanks so much for organising it. Thanks, George, for the invite. In the bio, so you sort of introduced me as you know, as an MP and obviously Minister for Apprenticeship and Skills, but I actually identified with something you said, Mark, which was about seeing the gap between what skills and talent, skills are being taught and what business and industry need. And I saw that gap as well, because before becoming an MP, I spent 30 years working in technology businesses all over the world and recruiting thousands of people. And there was two things that struck me. The one was the disconnect and how difficult it is to get education really in sync with a fast-moving technology environment and a global technology environment, and what it is we need to do better to keep those things working really well. So I'm actually delighted that I'm now in this job at this time with this opportunity to try and contribute to that challenge. And it's certain that the pandemic has also been a great challenge for education, but it is also an opportunity for us to adopt technological and behavioural changes amongst providers, teachers, students, the whole system really. We've already learned such a lot in a short time, and one of the most important things is the behavioural change that's happened. Behavioural change, I was involved in starting the journey for digital cash in 1990s in Tokyo in 1996, and it took forever, and largely the technology was there. Technology is often there ahead of the behavioural change, and that's because it's something new, it's something scary, it's something that, I can imagine if we were trying to convince all of the FE teachers, for example, that everything needed to be digital within a couple of weeks, we would have had an impossible job. But when you've got no choice, everything went digital, and everything went digital really quickly. And actually the education sector did by and large respond really well, and certainly the bit that I'm responsible for further education did a brilliant job of moving everything online, very engaging classes and very interactive. So they did a brilliant job. We've also seen the establishment of things like the Oak National Academy. We established a National Academy in April, overnight really. And that was obviously as a rapid response to the coronavirus outbreak. And that's an online classroom which is made by teachers for teachers, and it offers free, high quality video lessons and resources. And it's had 4.7 million unique users who've already visited the site. Again, if we'd have talked about that in February, nobody would have thought that was possible. So we really proved a lot to ourselves during the pandemic, and that's where the opportunity comes. We've responded by making rapid investment in technology. Of course, we also had to make sure that everybody had access to technology, because that was the only way we were all doing anything in our lives, really. So between May and July 2020, we set up the Get Help with Technology program, which provided laptops, tablets, 4G wireless routers to local authorities and academy trusts for children, families, and those adults most in need, those that didn't have access. And actually, I think in general, it was really the dongles, the data, that was often the thing that was most valued really, and most required, because a lot of people do have access to technology, but data, and when you've got everybody at home, there were some data challenges as well. We've been supporting schools through the Key for School leaders to access one of 2 free-to-use digital education platforms. That's G Suite for Education and Office 365 Education, and obviously further supporting schools and colleges to adapt to this change. So, we've been given demonstrator to schools and colleges to help those that perhaps were a bit further behind on technology, providing peer-to-peer support, spreading this sort of learning and sharing content even, and we've extended the College Collaboration Fund, which really now supports the digital resource development. Again, these are all things that have come quite quickly. Our research and development partnership with Nesta is supporting schools and colleges by building a useful evidence base of what works and what does not work well. And we will take some lessons from that, because we need to support edtech companies to improve their remote learning tools as well. All of us have gone through this massive baptism of fire in a way. But what we're doing is we're doing all this because it is crucial that young people get opportunities, no matter what challenges we face. And obviously coronavirus is still with us. We're hearing of lockdowns in various parts of the country. We're hoping all schools and education settings stay open, but we also need a plan B in case, and obviously online is that. Now, beyond that, the demand for STEM skills is growing, particularly for sectors such as engineering and construction, manufacturing, everything digital. There isn't a business in this country that is not digital now more than ever. So we're funding programs to take up, to increase the take up of maths and computing, physics, and really trying to improve the teaching of maths and science and computing in our schools, but also to encourage more young people to take them up. And actually maths is now the most popular A level, so it is working to some degree, but we obviously need to do more. And we're raising awareness of careers that STEM qualifications can offer, because a lot of people think of STEM and they think they probably have an old image of what STEM is in many ways. And I think it's really important that people know what STEM is in today's world, in the digital world, in the world that we're living in right now. And certainly for myself, I've banned anybody from using any photographs or any images which play into the stereotype of what STEM is. STEM is construction, it is manufacturing, it has got those elements as well, but it's also so much more, and we need to broaden the understanding of what STEM is and what STEM careers are. In the Department for Education, we've now introduced a basic digital skills, which is a universal entitlement to everybody at any age, at any stage. That was introduced in August. We were doing that anyway, but goodness, what great timing. Maybe it would have been better the August before, but in terms of being able to respond to the world we're living in now. And we've also introduced something called the Skills Toolkit, which is a collaboration with lots of tech employers, which I think is really great, actually, because you can go on, they're all free, you can do the courses in your own time. And we've now done the second wave, and we've had hundreds of tech companies offering really valuable resources. And so we're going to be using that more and more as a way to reach people. T-levels, for anyone who hasn't heard of T-levels, these are really fantastic. I've spent my summer going to virtual open days, and I can tell that these have been developed with businesses as well as with the education sector, and that is the sweet spot. That's the thing, Mark, that makes this system really work, when you're working together with very leading employers and normally multinational employers as well, so they've got a real global view of the skills that are needed and the talent race that we're all in, and they have helped design T-levels, and I'm delighted that we went ahead even despite the pandemic and kept to schedule to make sure that they were introduced, because I think they will revolutionize technical education in this country, and they are fantastic. And I think hopefully they're going to also overcome that perennial battle of that many graduates have, or many people have, which is, you haven't got any work experience. Well, I need a job to get work experience. Well, you haven't got any work experience, and this constant catch-22, because T-levels do have a minimum of 9-week work placement, valuable, high quality industry placement, which I think is going to be great for young people.
Gillian, just a point there, not every student is academic, some of them are technical, so that's a great opportunity with the T-levels, and I think that it provides young people an alternative. If they're not academic, they can fall into this T-level remit, which has a plethora of different industry providers and different people to contribute to that.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, they are equivalent to 3 A levels. And if you get the top grade, it's actually equivalent to 3 A stars, so 168 UCAS points. But it's a different type of study. I did an apprenticeship. I left school at 16 and did an apprenticeship. And I loved learning and studying at the same time. It really, whether you're academic or not, it's a great way, if you're technically minded, to actually learn. I call it career-led study. It's basically you're in a workplace and then you're confirming and reaffirming and learning more and transferring knowledge actually between the two. So it's also people who really have like a more practical way of learning. So they are a great opportunity. Obviously apprenticeships, I did an apprenticeship and I am the world's biggest fan of apprenticeships. I left school at 16, a comprehensive school in Merseyside, and I did an apprenticeship, which took me all the way to degree apprenticeship. When I left school, I never would have thought I could have done a degree. I never thought I was academic at all, but actually that way of learning meant I could go on, and it really made sense to me. So apprenticeships are a great way for young people to get the skills they need. And of course, we've been very focused on trying to, through the recovery plan, make sure that we encourage and incentivize lots of employers to take on apprentices. So we've been providing incentives that just started actually from August for £2,000 onwards for young apprentices and 1,500 for older apprentices. So we've got a number of things in our skills recovery plan as well, which really are focused on trying to offering more ability to get to do high value courses, particularly in skills gaps. I think one of the things we've understood is before the pandemic, we were almost in full employment. We had 3.8% unemployment, and we had massive skills gaps in every sector. So my job at the first couple of months was about, you know, how do we fill skills gaps in construction, in engineering, in health, teachers. I mean, pretty much everywhere we had massive skills gaps, and we will still have those skills gaps at some point in the near future, because most of them were in industries that are still going to need the skills. Health, for example, is not going to be reducing its employment need anytime soon. There's also been a lot of investment in the FE sector, in capital, in institutes of technology, to make sure that we have the latest equipment, because I think that's an important thing, that you need to have that to make sure that people, you know, young people are learning the latest techniques with the latest equipment that really does replicate what they will see in the workplace. So I think that's very, very important. So, you know, there's an awful lot of things that are going on. FE is a huge focus of this government, and the Levelling Up agenda it's really seen that it's kind of, it's the untapped resource, and it's really what most businesses are crying out for as well. So we're at the beginning of the journey. We have the opportunity to shape the National Skills Fund, which is a £2.5 billion investment in adult skills, which has been committed already. And I think, you know, some of the lessons we've learned through the global pandemic gives us the opportunity to perhaps look more ambitiously at more modular upskilling, more flexible delivery, and things that perhaps we would have thought were maybe years out, and we can bring that to you know, ever closer. And it's important. I mean, this is probably the biggest revolution in our technical education in this country in about 70 years. But we do need to get it right, because we do know we suffer from low productivity, and we do know that this is a race that we have to make sure we're really good at, and we're in it to win it, so that we and skills are a massive part of that journey, and we need to make sure that everybody has the access to those skills at any stage of their life, whenever and wherever they are.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive overview. And probably one of the things that I've been thinking about, and especially being a teacher myself, is around a lot of young people's apprenticeships that were promised before the pandemic has now been removed. And one of the things that I've started to see now is that there's more and more a need for educators and for government to really support young people through this process. But further ado, we've got another wonderful speaker coming up.
I've just got to run, but I'll come back and listen. So apologies, I've missed some of you.
And thank you very much, Gillian, for that, for the view on that. But we're going to move on to Jen, and I'm really excited, Jen, from who's got a really interesting view on edTech and how edTech has, you know, been seen in the last couple months. So, Jen, do you want to lead this wonderful presentation that you have in store for us?
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to Gillian. It's a shame she said to dash, but I hope she'll be able to catch up, perhaps will join us later, because right now we're at, I think, a really important time for not only education, but edTech in particular, as the government's expected to publish a white paper on further education in Britain. And it's vital that the digital infrastructure and environment in education is considered in that. At the moment, I think it's not enough. And we've been looking at this from the perspectives of rights, access, and opportunity. So it's from that three sort of point plan that we've looked at this afternoon. And Joe is going to cover the access area more than myself. And obviously Gillian really addressed the sort of opportunities angle. but they all tie together. And I think it's really important that we start to see further education, the aspects of digital infrastructure and what matters in further education across the whole of the education sector. A lot of the issues are similar. So I think we've seen over this summer, you know, the exams 2020, where algorithms and automated decision making play such an important role in all of our lives now, that we live in a much more automated and digital environment, and we need to make sure that our human rights are championed within that environment. And that's really where our perspective comes from. So we'll start with just thinking a bit about the rush to remote learning, you know, in response to the pandemic, because children's rights were really ignored at speed and scale in 2020 in this rush to adopt technology. It was critical, obviously, to meet children's right to education and do that in the best way that schools could. And it was only through the enormous efforts that schools put in and teachers put in that made that happen. But we're now at the point where a lot of that technology that was offered for free at the start of the pandemic is now going to start charging. And it gives schools an opportunity to really do the due diligence and assessment of technology that they hadn't had a chance to do. We need to make sure we're building a safe and trustworthy digital environment and education that's not only fit for children's future and the long-term social and economic needs of the UK, but is obviously building part of the government's edTech strategy. Because the government is really looking at a twofold strategy in edTech, both of supporting admin primarily, so the edTech strategy that came out in April 2019, and supporting teachers in sort of workload and addressing their administrative functions. And then it has a second strategy along with Bayes looking at edTech as an export tool. But it means that we don't have a very joined up strategy at the moment. And it means that the vision for education and edTech isn't consistent. In fact, it's often contradictory. And Gillian brought up already the funding that was offered to Google and Microsoft exclusively for schools to go to Google or Microsoft products at the start of the pandemic, but not to others. And so we start to look at, you know, the sort of where is funding going and what kind of infrastructure is it building? So funding at the moment, as Gillian mentioned, at least in England, because obviously the edTech strategy is devolved like education is going very much on an ad hoc basis to individual companies. And children are in effect in some of the work that's going on with Nesta and DFE together are in some ways caught in sort of quite a lot of experimentation that they may not know it at the moment, because a lot of the products are sort of being trialed in schools to try and generate an evidence base that they don't currently have. But we need to look better at how we do that and also protect children's rights in doing so. If we look, for example, at the early years, so there were 6 early years apps approved this spring, and they may well have some good learning benefits that were academically assessed, but it appears that the assessment of their financial soundness, the companies behind them, or the suitability may have not been done. We're still trying to get that clarified, but it certainly wasn't done as part of the academic assessment. Because, you know, the sort of one of the most notable previous experiences that one of the company co-founders had, you know, was working with young people, but was interviewing his fellow students to make videos on YouTube. They weren't really looking at, you know, children and pedagogy and learning. So I think we really need to make a better assessment when we assess tech for what is the learning purpose behind the technology? Who sits behind it and what kind of values sit behind it? So we need government to deliver better digital infrastructure, but also oversight and regulation and training for schools and staff to be able to actually implement technology well. And we're not really looking at you know, adopting products for product's sake. And in some ways, that's what the current edTech strategy does through demonstrator schools. We're looking at product adoption and selling more products, but we aren't really looking at a systemic way of addressing how these can address better skill gaps or be introduced in a systemic way that supports learning. And I think there was quite a lot of disappointment in the 2019 release of the edTech strategy that it didn't focus on learning. So really, we're looking at things like accessibility, the infrastructure, internet access. While Gillian addressed some of what was done, we know that a lot of children are still missing they're not getting the infrastructure and the broadband access that they need. We need to be looking, though, beyond that and a bigger picture vision of how we deliver education to all. And part of that includes looking at things like fairness and avoiding algorithmic discrimination in systems. Not only looking at the systemic barriers of poverty, racism, access, but also looking at how we look at the systems themselves. And if they're being trained on historic data, they'll pick up the same problems that we saw reflected in the exams 2020 fiasco, that historic data doesn't give you necessarily the best picture for how children should be assessed for the current or for future. We need to be looking at horizon scanning for emerging technologies and rights related issues. And part of that, I would include things like what sort of dependence we have on Silicon Valley based tech. If we are, for example, funding exclusively, access to Google and Microsoft, what does that mean for the sovereignty of our state education system? If these companies are currently offering free products, what does it mean if they start charging in future? And what does it mean if we don't know what that will look like in the future and if it will change? We also then hand over a huge amount of power to these companies in that we hand over knowledge of how the education system works and how our children's data provides that knowledge to them without any benefit to the public interest. It's handed over to commercial companies and sits with them indefinitely. We need to be looking at better clarity, consistency and confidence in the education system. School staff need really to get continuous professional development. Not only do we not have any basic data or protection or privacy or actually just functional digital literacy in basic teacher training today, but we don't offer it to teachers throughout their careers. And these sort of 5 areas looking at accessibility and infrastructure and internet access, designing for fairness in systems, horizon scanning for emerging technologies and rights issues, building the clarity, confidence and consistency in the education sector is something we want to see, and we'd like to see championed by a digital champion for the education sector. The Department for Education and Department for International Trade new education strategy has set out the government's ambition to appoint an international education champion to spearhead overseas activity. Where's that champion for the UK and our children here at home? So we'd like to see these sort of areas in policy addressed, and also be looking at legislation, because we really need to be able to protect children's access rights, not only for mainstream, but for children that are seeking, that even have difficulty accessing school places at all. So some of you may have seen the Panorama program last night with Children with SEND. Those children and families may experience the kind of exclusion every day from education that others have only experienced through the pandemic. So we need to look at how we address those access issues for every child. We need to look at how we address the system that is built at the moment to deliver 1/3 of children when they leave school as with an exam results that says they failed. The system by design through comparable outcomes does not enable the system to look any different. The outcomes for children will always be the same, no matter how smart our children become in future. 1/3 will always fail if we keep the current exam system structure and accountability system, comparable outcome system as it is today. So we need to establish a sort of whole government approach for a framework of governance, of infrastructure, of oversight that champions the best of what we've got today for digital, and really looks to a better future for both our own children and how we integrate that as part of an edtech strategy for export.
Thank you, Jen, for that comprehensive view. And some of the things that there's so much thoughts flashing in my mind. And I think that if you have got a question, please put it in the chat. If this session is going to be recorded, so there's an opportunity to come back and digest that information. And I will plug it halfway. If you are not a member of Big Tent, here's an opportunity this month to sign up for £6 a month or £60 for the whole year. But one of the things that that comes to my mind is that we used to say data was the new gold, But actually, listening to Jen, it seems like trust and transparency and inclusion from all different stakeholders is going to be the new goal for technology and edtech. And that leads on to the next point around Joe Hutchinson, who's got a fantastic insight into some of these issues. So Joe, do you want to lead your presentation on what you're thinking, where the landscape is going with edtech and beyond?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thanks to Gillian and Jen for their interesting inputs as well. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and consider the sort of broad range of access issues within education in England today. And there are myriad ways in which access to education is limited or unequal, more than people may imagine. Children and young people have universal and specific needs that are prerequisites for them to be able to access the full benefit of education. These range from the universal needs such as physical needs for food, warmth, enough sleep, psychological needs to feel safe and cared for within consistent relationships with adults, social needs to interact with peers when they're learning, to receive support and advice from adults, to learn about behaviour and emotional self-regulation, and for remote learning and also just regular homework, a quiet desk space at home combined with internet-enabled devices and good internet access are also increasingly needed in this day and age. Some children have more specific needs. For example, some need physical care or face-to-face teaching due to special needs and disabilities they have. Some need English language support to be able to access the curriculum before they become fully proficient in English. Some lack a school place, as Jen mentioned, sometimes due to delays in SEND assessment and shortages of specialist places locally, sometimes due to geographical mobility, or needing alternative provision beyond the age of 16, which doesn't exist in a national scale. Other children lose their places due to exclusion, off-rolling, or simply due to changes in care placements over time, and some experience long-term absence, isolation, and multiple fixed period exclusions as an alternative form of losing access to the full education to which they're entitled. These things are highly variable, but there are several groups of children who are consistently at greater risk of missing out. These are children living in poverty, as Jen mentioned, those with special needs, disabilities, or mental health needs, children in care or in contact with social workers, migrant and asylum seeking children, and Black or Gypsy, Roma or traveller children in particular are at risk of certain negative outcomes. There are also many subtler effects, such as large gaps in access to subjects such as music, physical education, and some foreign languages as GCSE subjects that limit the enrichment for more disadvantaged children within their curriculum. As they get older, the increasingly selective of education pathways means that disadvantages accumulated at an earlier age often become baked into later options, limiting access to certain qualification routes based on prior attainments. Geographical inequalities also play in here, where young people live can have a profound effect on whether they can go to university, especially in cases where the expense of living in is necessary in order to access a particular course or to access university at all. So during COVID, some of these access problems have become more widespread, but sometimes simply more visible to us. We can increase the resilience of access to education, and digital solutions are certainly part of that story. But it is important not to reshape the whole education system around what is easiest to deliver virtually, because that's a mistake we've actually already made, shaping the education system too much around what's easy to assess in terms of children's outcomes. There's little doubt that the best online learning practice has advanced this year, but there is a big job to equalise practice at that level, and that involves staff training and platforms, as mentioned, for many schools. There are still hundreds of thousands of young people, according to the ONS, without access to devices and the internet. And schools are currently struggling with the immediate concerns of extra cleaning costs and staff cover as the pandemic evolves. There's also potential to spread the benefit of the highest quality and most experienced teachers further through virtual lessons. Those tend to be distributed further away from the more disadvantaged children within schools to equal access to IT facilities and quiet desk space locally, however, for children living in overcrowded conditions in particular, could increase the reach and accessibility of this. We've not made as much progress for children with special educational needs and disabilities and those who are looked after, many of whom are still awaiting the reinstatement of their statutory support. The assessment processes were never good and now have extra backlogs within them from shutdowns in services. Nor have we solved the problems of poverty, many of which are best and easiest solved by increasing welfare support. So what can we do about all of this? I'm going to share three big ideas to finish off here, but it all starts from acknowledging that these access needs are real and cumulative, and then prioritising them within government policy. So to do this, we need to think about school outcomes in broader terms than we currently are. The inclusion of children within the education system who have additional needs has been set in conflict with education standards, and that's because of the way we measure these, which is too naive. Research actually told us over 15 years ago that 90% of the differences in academic success actually come from within schools. That's not between school A and school B, but between different pupils within the same schools. So access is not only about which school you go to. School accountability is also a powerful tool, but yet it has no purchase at all on provision for children with additional needs, and sometimes disincentivizes work to improve this. This is about data limitations and the use of data and accountability, but a lot of it's also about wrong choices in the use of those data, just as we saw with the 2020 exam awards this year. The second point I'd raise is to make them more resilient. Our school practices need to acknowledge what we don't know. We don't always know which children are experiencing additional needs or trauma. The concept of reasonable adjustments is very important, especially for children with SEND, but you can only use it when you know who needs it. To give just one example, we know that 1 in 11 children have been sexually exploited, very sadly, in this country, but we only know who 1 in 8 of those children are. In fact, we are quite poor at identifying a range of different needs, and therefore we must be careful not to make access and support too rationed or too contingent. My final suggestion is that there's also been emerging evidence that some children, often those with anxiety disorders, have experienced improved well-being while schools were closed. And we need to reflect on what that means for education. For example, reducing stressors such as bullying within school should be a priority. Some families and teachers of children with autistic spectrum disorder have also reported improved learning outcomes under remote provision. This is a two-way phenomenon, however, and well-being and learning has worsened for other groups, often including children with depression. We should use these differences to learn about and adapt the system according to what children need to help them better access it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, for that fantastic overview. And sometimes we forget that schools is all about putting students to the center of what we do. And when we start to put, whether it's edTech, the profits, whatever else that we try and fill in that gap, that's when the inconsistencies happen. And one of the things, being an educator myself, is that the young people buy into the teacher before they buy into the learning. And that's very, one of the most important things that I say to a lot of teachers is that young people want to believe in the people, the adults that are standing in front of them, that they've got their best interest at hand, and that we want to make the education system the best in the world. And off the back of that, when we do look at edTech and when we do look at the power of edTech to transform the UK education system, here is the opportunity to get it right. Here is the opportunity to make sure that what Jem was saying about in terms of the accountability, the transparency that we have with these tools is really important. So we're going to move into some Q&A now, but Jen, you raised a very valid point earlier around accountability, and there's probably edtechs listening in now. What would be your kind of message of support to support edtechs? Because there's some vulnerable edtechs thinking, are we getting it right? What are the things that we need to do to get it right, so that when we do come into schools, or when we do think about building in technology, we're not baking in biases or dodgy algorithms that's going to basically ruin my edtech in the next couple of years. So what's your thoughts on that, Jen?
There's a lot there. I mean, I think the questions really come down to, as you said, you know, why is it being adopted at all? And is the child at the center of this product? And if it's really about product, and the edtech company is really not looking at it from a child's perspective, they're probably missing something important. And we find, at least, we're about to bring out a report looking at the whole of the data flows across the state education sector. We've been mapping it for about 5 years now, both the state systems, you know, accountability systems, the statutory testing, the school censuses, and then the edtech sector. And edtech, you know, we talk a lot about data protection law, and edtech has had a lot of focus on GDPR, but actually they need to also be looking at whether you can do the thing with your technology. You know, should you be doing it as well? So there's a lot of questions around things like if your artificial intelligence program is being sold as artificial intelligence, is it really, or is it just a marketing hype, and is it just using a bit of computer and big data? You know, be honest. Is it accountable to the child and their family, or are you passing the buck back to the school saying, oh, we're just a processor? But actually your company is taking data and then stripping some of it out and giving it to other companies, or you know, passing it around to all your affiliates around the world, or could be using it with selling it on to researchers. So there's some ethical questions around the use of children's data in edtech, as well as the practical and legal questions. I think a lot of the time schools really need better support. They haven't got good infrastructure at the moment to do that due diligence. They haven't got the expertise and knowledge that some of the emerging technologies demand, because it's really unfair to put a teacher or school really in that position where that knowledge isn't something that they have been given and they're suddenly expected to do. So Scotland has a very good system, I think, of, you know, regional, I mean, partly because of their education system structure is still different, but their local authorities have a regional model of expertise, and they approve or decline apps and edtech on the basis of various criteria that the local authority sets. And I think edtech companies could be, you know, learning a thing or two from the companies that the Scottish authorities declined, and that would explain, you know, what some things the local authorities think either don't have educational value, they don't have proven pedagogy, or they don't actually, you know, meet legal and statutory requirements.
Thank you very much, Jen. And we had a question that's coming from Alan Dean, a very familiar person to me. And he's mentioned about, and this is probably directed to you, Joe, about the how can we support well-being for students and teachers in this time of crisis and in pandemic? Is there anything from your side when you look at social mobility and when you're looking at some of the real issues that's in the headlines, is there any kind of things that you would recommend?
I think I would say that really, as far as the research suggests, absolutely at the core of young people's well-being and their resilience in times of crisis or unusual things happening is the relationship with a trusted adult who they believe is on their side and believes in them, and they know will continue to fulfill that role for them. And children are much more likely to be resilient to a whole range of traumatic things that can take place in their lives if they do have that trusted adult. Obviously, for many children, they have parents that can fulfill this role, but sadly, not every child is in that position in this country. And sometimes a teacher is the best option for that. And sometimes it needs to be with specific relevance to education and learning. And where parents haven't had a very positive experience within the education system themselves, it's much harder for them to play that role.
Thank you very much. And we've got I want to bring someone in from this kind of event, and the first person I want to bring in is Alison Shaw from Newcastle University. Alison Shaw, you had a question that was centered around the power of digital opportunity. Do you want to expand on that, Alison Shaw from Newcastle University?
Absolutely. So I think that we have some qualification-driven imperatives which tend to lead the curriculum instead of, frankly, the other way around. And as we know, the world is changing rapidly because of technology, but also because of other things. So that if we take the standard 3 years or so to generate qualifications, the likelihood is that they will be out of date, specifically and particularly when we're talking about digital subjects. So I just wondered if there are any comments about this, digital applications and also the content around those things ought, in this world with youngsters as digital natives, as we call them, to lead to the most exciting, relevant, motivating kinds of learning. And I just really welcome comments from panelists or anyone else about how to harness that power rather than, as I say, enslaving the curriculum to whether it's qualifications or the tools that we use to teach them.
Thank you, Alison, very much. Jen, do you want to, I know that probably you might be wanting to answer this one.
Sure, I mean, where do you start? But I think there's at different levels of education, you can address that in different ways. I mean, I think certainly there is a very strong argument, and, you know, your fellow academic, I mean, the late, you know, Harvey Goldstein and colleagues have exposed very, very clearly how the weaknesses of the accountability system, you know, using sort of basically a lot of the curriculum, not, you know, the curriculum becomes taught in ways that meet the accountability system in order to deliver the structure of education that gets rewarded through the Ofsted system or through progress measures, and is seen to be valued above perhaps the values of education. And I think we're at a critical crisis moment of deciding in this country, where does the value of education, where does the purpose of education sit in everything that is delivered, in not only the content of curriculum, but in how it is delivered. And if we do not address that now, I think we will end up being in a position that we've not only let down our young people who will be going into the most unstable, unpredictable, and unsafe economic environment that we have known, at least in my lifetime and probably before, beyond Brexit, beyond the pandemic, but we'll actually put ourselves in an incredibly weak economic position. And I think this actually, the fundamentals of how we teach a curriculum and who gets taught how and how it's delivered, you know, rests on why are we teaching children at all? And yes, it fits very much into the skills agenda, and that children need to have the skills and competencies, rather than the GCSE marks or the grades. You know, the competencies count for much more in real life. What we actually have right now is a system that is a sorting out system. It grades children and says, this third has failed, this third can probably get into the university of their choice, and these others might, you know, look at an assortment of academic or vocational or technical qualifications. We don't need really to set children up to fail. We need to set them up with skills and competencies that have given each child that fundamental opportunity to flourish for the rest of their life. And in doing so, will do the best for the economy.
Thank you very much. And I'm reading through the chats and I'm seeing so many interesting comments around edtech and the power of edtech. And Anna Firth has said something around learning purely through technology is unlikely to be a lasting or good for their well-being. And you know, as someone who's in education, I always see edtech as a tool. It's not the, you know, it's not the holy grail. It's not the curriculum. It's just a tool. It's an enabler to get something done. But Anna, do you want to touch on that point a bit more in what you were saying, because I find it very fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mark. I've joined this webinar because I found myself over the summer holiday founding an online academy. Not something which I was planning to do, but when it became apparent that the schools were going to shut throughout the summer and there was going to be no consistent massive summer catch-up, and that some children were going to have been out of a setting for, you know, nearly 6 months, I just thought that we have to act and we have to help children to catch up if they want to. And a whole load of other really dedicated teachers and parents joined me, and we started something called the Invicta Summer Academy. And we were completely overwhelmed with demand. We offered maths and English online every day throughout the summer holidays, every morning. And we were so oversubscribed in Kent. We then reached out to other teachers in Oxford, in London, in Lancashire and Surrey. And we had 5 academies, 240 teachers applied to teach, 127 were recruited, a third of them were volunteers. It was a massive, massive community effort. But where I think it was very different from some of the things that have been talked about this afternoon, and why I put that in the chat, is that our version of it was live and interactive. So we had live teachers in front of all the children, albeit obviously it was done through the screen, and the cameras were switched off for safeguarding reasons. But we had 2 teachers, if you like, in every webinar, so the children could interact through the Q&A function. And what we have seen, and this turned out to be a massive, massive pilot, 40,000 unique learning opportunities. And what we've seen through our exit survey is that this live interactive teaching is really, really effective. You know,
I'm going to pause you there, Anna, because we're really rushed for time, but what you're saying and what you have done is where we see real innovation take place, where you saw there was a real need for what the issue was at the time, and then you solved it with you know, real edtech and really changing the lives of those people in your local area. We could definitely have a chat after. We've got some time after to have a chat, but I got one more question for the Minister. And the question that I have for the Minister is that one of the biggest issues that we face in society is, yes, we know that there's a massive digital skills gap for young people and for the sector actually. And one of the issues that we're finding is that, yes, we know there's a digital skill gap, but there's also an awareness gap. So depending on what bubbles or what circles you're in, you get entitled to the access and opportunities. And I know that you mentioned before in your introduction that there's so many different kind of schemes and initiatives that are being presented. But how do we get to the hard to reach young people? How do we get to the hard to reach communities that probably, if they were aware of these opportunities, how do they take advantage of them? So any thoughts on that, Gillian?
Yeah, and sorry to miss all of your speeches. I'll go and listen to it on catch up. And Anna did a fantastic job. Good to see you, Anna. You're just amazing. So, I mean, it is always the challenge, and sometimes you know, you think there's a bit of initiative overload. Sometimes there's lots of people trying to do lots of things, but how do you make sure everybody knows about these things and gets access to them, finds a route? So in terms of what we've been doing, there've been some massive campaigns which have been centered around 3 things. One is apprenticeships, and really trying to change the whole, I guess the branding of apprenticeships to, you know, we have apprenticeship stands in 590 different jobs in different careers now. So we've had a Fire It Up campaign around that, and we're really trying everything. Social media, we've got TikTok, we're doing lots and lots of different ways to reach young people. We've done the same with the skills toolkit, so we also go to the student rooms and all of the chat places that they go, and we've also done it with T-levels. So they've been the three big focuses, and we just won't stop. We'll just continue on those same three things, so that they, the three things, so they get through. These are the three things, three routes to get new skills. What we've been doing about schools, because that's also been a big challenge, right? The schools, and making sure that schools are, when they're giving advice to young people about what paths are available, that they include a broader range than the typical, these 3 A levels get you into this Russell Group university, or if you go to a comprehensive school in Knowsley like I went to, none of that gets you anywhere. So whichever end of the spectrum you're on. So we've been working with the Careers and Enterprise Company, which has basically been working with schools to really improve and broaden the careers advice. And what we're trying to do is make sure every young person gets an option to go into a number of business settings and job settings, so they get to actually see it. And we've done some virtual ones of these as well. We did them over lockdown, which were, sort of careers week, where lots of businesses made themselves available, and young people could just dial in and ask them questions and see the kind of jobs that are available in these businesses. Until I started my apprenticeship, I had no idea. I mean, I started it in a multinational car factory. Every job, pretty much, every single career you could have got in that factory. And I saw, because they sent you all to different parts of the world as well, actually, with their apprenticeship program, I saw just the broad range of things on offer. Every kid needs to see that, and then to start to look into all these alternative routes. And the best route to get to some of these jobs is definitely via T-levels and a higher level apprenticeship, up to a degree level apprenticeship.
Thank you. So we're really cut for time, but I really want to summarize some of my thinking around today's conversation. And a couple of weeks ago, I led a presentation on young Black kids studying computer science. And I'm going to take on this quick 30-second journey and why it's really important. Today's conversation is always at the forefront of what we do, because when ICT had changed to computer science, there was an over 50% dropout of Black African and Caribbean students out of computer science. And then when we looked at university, very small of them actually went on to university courses and got degrees to get into the industry. And then when they got into the industry, they were 60% more unlikely to be unemployed. And then compared to like a white student who was like 8%. And then when we looked into society in terms of how much of those Black and African British born are on tech companies or sit on their boards, it was 0%. And then the algorithm that was adopted from an organization actually stopped and searched a 14-year-old Black kid from Southeast London. They took his DNA and fingerprint, because probably the data sets or the algorithm that you were using was biased. And it shows that if we're not challenging these systems at all fronts, from education into higher education into industry, there will be biases that will one day exclude or harm the people that we're trying to serve. And I think that what Jen was saying around how do we keep companies to account? How do we help? How do we make sure that the policies that we put into place is, one, it's helping edtech to be transparent. It's helping to build trust between schools and families and local communities, but also advocating for real change that we want to see. EdTech has the opportunity to be the #1 thing that we export from the UK, but it needs to make sure that the policies and practices that we've put into place are clear for all to understand. And then what Joe was saying around, do we understand the holistic child? Do we understand the child who goes home and doesn't have the access to technology, or has the table or has special needs? How are we listening as educators and edtech companies to really support that? And then with the minister talking about there is lots of opportunities that exist, but it's about the access. It's about how do we make sure that access is clearer for communities. It's also welcoming for them to engage with, but also that we are championing the things that as me being an educator still in the classroom, that one day that the young person sitting in my classroom has the same opportunity to whether grow a digital business or to get a job in tech. And I think that these kind of conversations is seed planters. It's not just the end today, it's what we do now. How do we influence the communities and young people that we're trying to serve? So I could go on a lot and I could talk on a lot, but I'm going to pause there. But I want to thank you for Big Ten and the sponsors today. They've been awesome and amazing to put in this conversation together. But also I want you to be a reminder that you can follow this live recording at another point if you want to go through the points again. Make sure that you sign up. If you're not a member, it's £6 a month or £60 for the whole year. And now I'm going to hand over to the organisers. Back over to you.